What you're about to hear isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about the moment a grandmother uncovered a secret buried in a newborn's first cry. Stay until the end because what begins as a simple phone call will unravel an entire family's truth. The lavender baby blanket slipped from my fingers when Caroline's words hit me through the phone. He was born 3 days ago. Only special people came to meet him. Special people. I stood in my kitchen in our small colonial home in Brookline, surrounded by 67 years of memories, feeling my knees weaken. The morning sun streaming through my lace curtains suddenly felt cold. Daniel's wife, my daughter-in-law, had just told me I wasn't special enough to meet my first grandchild. 3 days, I whispered, though my throat burned. But I called the hospital every morning. They said you hadn't checked in. We switched hospitals last minute. Caroline said, her tone crisp and businesslike, like she was declining a dinner invitation, rather than explaining why she'd hidden my grandson's birth from me. My mother found us a better private suite at Prescott Medical. Her mother, of course, Vivian Prescott, the woman who'd spent our entire first meeting scanning my modest home with polite disapproval, asking pointed questions about my late husband's pension, my teaching years, whether I'd ever thought about upgrading neighborhoods. The woman who once suggested that modern child-rearing might be too much for a woman of my generation. Is Daniel there? I managed to ask. He's busy with the baby. Ethan's been fussy. Ethan. They'd even chosen the name without me. We talked about names for months. Daniel had promised to call the moment they decided. Another promise broken. Could I at least see a photo? The words tasted like surrender. I'll send one later. I have to go. The line went dead. I sank into Patrick's old armchair, the one I'd kept despite its worn arms because it still smelled faintly of his cologne. 4 years since cancer took him, and now I was losing Daniel too, pulled away by his wife's family money and their subtle contempt for everything I represented. The photo arrived 2 hours later. My breath caught. Ethan was beautiful, perfect tiny fingers, a rosebud mouth peaceful in sleep. But as I zoomed in, my nurse's training kicked in. The hospital bracelet on his impossibly small wrist was partially visible. My fingers trembled as I enhanced the image. The date was clear, October 3rd. Today was October 20th. That wasn't 3 days ago. That was over 2 weeks ago. I studied the photo more carefully. Something else nagged at me, something beyond the lie about timing. The lighting was soft, almost professional. Behind Ethan, I could make out the edge of what looked like an elegant nursery, not a hospital room. Flowers, champagne glasses, and pale wallpaper, clearly a celebration. They'd had a party. While I sat at home knitting blankets for a grandson I thought was still in the womb. My phone rang again. Daniel. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded tired, distant. Caroline said you called. Daniel, sweetheart, why didn't you tell me Ethan was born? It all happened so fast, he said, too quickly, too rehearsed. Caroline's mom had everything arranged. I didn't want to stress you with the rush. 2 weeks isn't a rush, Daniel. It's a decision. Silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we weren't saying. Can I meet him tomorrow? I kept my voice gentle, though my heart broke. I could bring the blanket I made, the one with the little elephants you loved as a baby. Caroline thinks we should wait. Let Ethan settle into a routine first. A routine, I repeated the word, tasting bitter. Of course, Mom, don't be like that. Like what, Daniel, like a grandmother who wants to meet her grandchild? Vivian says he caught himself, but it was too late. What does Vivian say? Nothing. Look, I have to go. Ethan's crying. Another lie. I heard no baby, only the muffled sounds of conversation and what might have been laughter. Were they having another gathering, another toast with special people? Daniel, wait, I said, gripping the phone tighter. The photo Caroline sent, there's something. But I stopped, because in that instant the thing that had been nagging at me crystallized. Ethan's hair, soft wisps against the blanket, caught the light in a way that stopped my breath. It was red. Not auburn, not strawberry blonde, distinctly unmistakably red. Daniel had his father's jet-black hair, thick and straight. Caroline's was the same, and Vivian had once bragged about their family's pure English heritage dark hair for generations. Something what, Mom? Nothing, I said quietly. He's beautiful. Yeah, Daniel's voice softened slightly. He is. After we hung up, I stared at the photo until my eyes burned. 2 weeks of lies. A grandson with impossible hair. A son who couldn't look me in the eye through the phone. I pulled my old nursing textbooks from the shelf, the ones I'd kept through 35 years of retirement, genetics, blood types, hereditary traits. Red hair is recessive. Both parents must carry the gene. In my kitchen, surrounded by photos of Daniel's black-haired childhood, I began to understand that being excluded from Ethan's birth might be the least of the secrets Caroline was keeping. The lavender blanket lay forgotten on the floor, its carefully stitched elephants marching nowhere. 3 days after that phone call, I drove to Daniel's house uninvited. The October rain pelted my windshield as I navigated through Brookline's tree-lined streets, each colonial home more imposing than the last. They'd moved there last year, courtesy of Vivian's investment help, a detail that stung even more now. I parked across from their ivy-covered Georgian and watched for a moment. Caroline's white Mercedes sat in the driveway beside Daniel's BMW, Vivian's graduation gift to them both. The curtains were drawn tight despite the afternoon light. My knock echoed too loudly on the mahogany door. Daniel answered, and the shock on his face told me everything. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I brought supplies." I held up a bag of frozen casseroles, my excuse for showing up. I remember how hard those first weeks are. He blocked the doorway, not moving aside. My son, the boy who used to run into my arms after school, who called me 3 times a week until he married Caroline, now stood there like a stranger guarding a fortress. "This isn't a good time." "It's never a good time, apparently." I tried to smile, but my eyes stayed fixed on his. 17 days, Daniel. Your son has been alive for 17 days. "Mom, please." "Who is it?" Caroline appeared behind him, Ethan in her arms. She was still in silk pajamas at 2 in the afternoon, her hair unwashed, but it was Ethan who drew my eyes. That red hair was even more striking in person, catching the hallway light like spun copper. His face was pale, his eyes bright, impossible blue, not Daniel's brown, not Caroline's hazel. Daniel stood frozen, blocking the hallway. The sound of the rain outside pressed against the windows, a rhythm that matched the pounding in my chest. I hadn't seen my son look that way since he was 15, caught between guilt and fear, torn between truth and loyalty. "Can I come in?" I asked quietly. Caroline shifted the baby to her other arm and gave me that tight social smile that never reached her eyes. "The house is a bit chaotic, Margaret. We weren't expecting visitors." "Clearly," I said. The scent of roses and disinfectant filled the air, too clean, too perfect, the kind of smell money buys to hide fatigue. "I just want to see Ethan," I said, "then I'll leave." Daniel hesitated, then stepped aside. The living room looked like something from a magazine, white couches, silver picture frames, an untouched baby swing in the corner. No warmth, no clutter. Nothing of Daniel's life before Caroline. I reached out to touch Ethan's hand. His skin was impossibly soft. He blinked up at me, the blue in his eyes catching the light like glass. Something in my chest clenched. "He's beautiful," I said, meaning it. "He doesn't look much like you, though." Caroline laughed too quickly. "Genes are funny that way. My great-uncle had red hair." Vivian's heels clicked down the stairs before I could answer. "Margaret," she said, voice dripping with practiced grace. "What a surprise." "I came to meet my grandson," I said. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. "You should have called first. Caroline's still recovering." "I did call," I said evenly. "Several times. No one answered." Daniel rubbed his temple. "Mom, please, let's not do this." "Do what? Be a grandmother." The baby whimpered. Caroline turned away, whispering something soft. The sound sliced through the silence like glass. I noticed a small white envelope on the side table beside the couch. The corner was stamped with the logo of Prescott Medical Center. It looked unopened, or maybe carefully resealed. "Daniel," I said slowly, "is that from the hospital?" He blinked, following my gaze. "It's paperwork, insurance stuff." Vivian stepped forward. "Margaret, you've always been curious. It's charming, really. But perhaps now isn't the time." The way she said charming felt like an insult wrapped in velvet. I smiled tightly. "You're right. Now's not the time. But the time will come." Caroline's grip on Ethan tightened. Daniel took a deep breath. "Mom, maybe you should go." So I did. But I didn't drive straight home. Outside, the rain had turned to a fine mist, the kind that lingers and chills you through your coat. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, watching the light behind their curtains flicker. Somewhere in that perfect house, something was terribly wrong. The next morning, I stopped by Helen Strauss's clinic. She'd been my colleague for 30 years back when we were young nurses at St. Mary's. She poured coffee and listened while I talked about the birth date on the hospital bracelet, the red hair, the closed curtains, and the unopened envelope. "You think she lied about the birth date?" Helen asked. "I don't think," I said. "I know." Helen sipped her coffee. "And the baby? You think he might not be Daniel's?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She sighed. "You could ask for a DNA test, but you know how that'll look. You'll be the villain." "I've been the villain before," I said, "and I survived." Helen leaned closer. "Then tread carefully. That family has money and lawyers. You have instinct, but instinct can make enemies." I nodded, but in my heart I'd already decided. That weekend I drove back to Brookline. I didn't go to their house this time. I went to Prescott Medical Center. The lobby gleamed like a hotel. The receptionist smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't care who you are unless your last name is on the donor wall. I'm here about a billing error, I said, using my old nurse's tone, authoritative but polite. For the delivery of Caroline Prescott Donnelly, October 3rd. The woman typed something, frowned. That record's been sealed. Private account. Of course it is, I murmured. I left before she could call security, but as I passed the gift shop, something caught my eye. A small white envelope on the counter with the same Prescott Medical logo. It was in a stack for outgoing mail. The top one read Dr. Ryan Mercer, Pediatric Genetics Unit. The name hit me like a jolt. Ryan Mercer. I remembered Caroline mentioning him once months ago, her colleague at the biotech firm, the one who helped with her project. A pediatric geneticist. My mind raced. The sealed records, the red hair, the hospital switch. I walked out into the cold afternoon air, clutching the strap of my purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Daniel as a boy. Dark hair sticking up, hands covered in mud from the garden, running to me with some wild story about building a fort. He'd always been honest, almost painfully so. He got that from his father. Patrick used to say, Maggie, our boy's heart is his compass. Don't ever let anyone twist it. I'd failed him. I'd let Caroline and her mother twist everything good and simple in his life. By dawn, I'd made another decision. I called Caroline. It's Margaret, I said when she finally picked up. I'd like to drop off something for Ethan. Her voice was tight. Daniel's not here. That's fine. I'm not coming in. I'll leave it by the gate. When I arrived, the street was still damp from last night's rain. No one answered when I knocked, so I placed a small box on the porch, a silver rattle that had belonged to Daniel, and beneath it a note. For Ethan, from the grandmother who still believes in truth. Then, tucked under the ribbon, I slipped a photo I'd printed from the hospital's online staff directory, Dr. Ryan Mercer's face, smiling red-haired. The phone rang that evening. Daniel's voice trembled. Mom, what did you do? I returned something that wasn't mine, I said. You can't just Caroline's furious, Vivian's threatening to call a lawyer. Then let her. Maybe the lawyer will be honest with you. Mom, stop! There was a long pause and then softer. You don't know what's happening here. You're right, I said, because no one will tell me. But you do know something's wrong. I can hear it in your voice. He didn't deny it. 2 nights later, there was a knock at my door. Daniel stood in the raincoat-soaked face, pale. In his hand was the silver rattle. Caroline said you were accusing her of things, he began. I'm not accusing anyone, I said. I'm asking questions. Questions your own heart is already asking. He stared at the floor. Ethan's been sick, crying all the time. She says it's colic, but I don't know. Bring him to the clinic, I said gently. Helen Strauss will look at him. I can't. Caroline would never. Then you decide, I said quietly. Who matters more, the truth or the comfort of a lie? He looked up, eyes red-rimmed. For a moment I saw my little boy again, the one who used to believe I could fix anything with a hug and a bandage. I don't know, he whispered. That was the moment I realized how deep the trap ran. Vivian hadn't just bought their house or arranged their hospital suite, she'd bought silence. She'd built walls of luxury so high my son couldn't see the ground anymore. And inside those walls, Caroline was hiding something that threatened all of them. As I closed the door that night, the sound of Daniel's car fading down the street, I saw a shadow on my porch. Someone had been watching. When I stepped outside, the street was empty, but a small white envelope lay on the doormat. No return address. Only my name, Margaret Donnelly, written in sharp, elegant handwriting. Inside was a single photograph. Ethan sleeping in Caroline's arms, and beside them, reflected in the mirror behind the crib, stood a man with red hair. My breath caught. The edges of the photo trembled in my hand. I turned it over. On the back, written in faint pencil, were 4 words. Ask Daniel about Mercer. I pressed the picture against my chest and sank into Patrick's old chair, the same one where I'd sat the day I first heard about Ethan's birth. The storm outside built into a low growl, thunder rolling across the rooftops. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath. Whatever this secret was, it had started long before I arrived at their door, and now it was coming for all of us. If you were in my place, would you stay silent to protect your child, or risk everything to uncover the truth? Type 0 if you'd walk away. Type 1 if you'd keep digging. The photo sat on my kitchen table all night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. Ethan's peaceful face, Caroline's arm curved protectively around him, and the reflection behind them. That man, red-haired, sharp-featured, familiar somehow, though I couldn't place him. By morning, I was certain of only one thing: someone wanted me to know something. I drove to Daniel's house again, the photograph in my bag. The streets were quiet, washed clean after the storm. When I pulled into their driveway, the house looked still, almost too still. Curtains drawn, no movement inside. I rang the bell once, twice, no answer. Then I noticed the faint sound of crying, thin, rhythmic, desperate. My heart seized. I tried the handle. It turned. Inside, the crying grew louder. Ethan. His tiny wails echoed through the hall. He was alone in his bassinet face, flushed fists balled. A bottle sat untouched on the nearby table. "Shh, sweetheart," I whispered, lifting him carefully. "Grandma's here." The door behind me opened. Caroline stumbled in hair unbrushed, eyes swollen. She froze when she saw me. "What are you doing here? What are you doing leaving a newborn alone?" I was just upstairs. For how long? My voice was sharper than I intended. 20 minutes, she muttered. Maybe 30. I rocked Ethan gently. He was hysterical. She pressed her hands to her temples. "I can't do this, Margaret. He cries all the time. He won't eat. Daniel's gone again work, he says, but I know it's because he can't stand being here." "He's scared," I said softly. "And so are you." Caroline sank onto the couch. "There's something wrong with him," she whispered. "He's pale. He sleeps too much. The pediatrician says it's just newborn adjustment, but..." The memory of Helen Strauss's warning flashed through my mind. Instinct can make enemies. "Take him to the hospital," I said. "Today." Caroline looked up sharply. "What are you implying?" Nothing, I said, though the photograph in my bag felt like it was burning a hole through the leather. But I was a nurse for 35 years. Babies don't sleep this much unless something's wrong. She hesitated. Then Ethan let out a weak cry that didn't sound right, thin, reedy. "I'll call Daniel," she said finally. By evening, they were at Massachusetts General. I stayed home pacing, waiting for the call that inevitably came at midnight. "Mom," Daniel's voice cracked. "It's bad. He's not breathing right. They're admitting him." I was out the door before he finished. The pediatric ICU was a blur of lights and antiseptic. I found Daniel outside the nursery window, his face, gray hands trembling. "They said his hemoglobin's dangerously low," he said. "They're running tests." Caroline sat in a chair across the hall, arms folded tightly. Vivian stood beside her, immaculate as ever, whispering instructions to a doctor who looked more annoyed than attentive. When Daniel saw me, his expression crumbled. "Mom, I don't understand. He's only 3 weeks old." "Where's his chart?" I asked. He blinked. "What?" "The medical chart, the one from the hospital." Caroline handled all that he said. "Vivian has connections." "Of course she does." Through the glass, I saw Ethan, tiny, pale, hooked to machines. My heart clenched so hard it hurt to breathe. "Does he have a blood type listed?" "They said they're checking it now. They'll need ours too." I touched his shoulder. "Then give it, both of you." Caroline looked up startled as we approached. "Margaret, please don't make this harder." "It's not about you," I said. "It's about saving your son." Vivian's mouth tightened. "Mrs. Donnelly, perhaps you should let the doctors handle this." "I am letting them handle it," I said calmly. "But I'm also not blind." The tension in the hallway could have cracked glass. An hour later, a resident returned with an uneasy expression. "Mr. and Mrs. Donnelly." He stopped when he saw Vivian. "And Mrs. Prescott." "Yes," Daniel said. "None of you are blood matches for Ethan. We'll start a universal donor transfusion, but we'll need more testing to determine compatibility." Caroline frowned. "That doesn't make sense. I'm his mother." "Sometimes these things happen," the doctor said cautiously. "We'll double check." But my old nursing instincts knew better. I looked at Daniel, at Caroline, then at Vivian, who avoided my gaze for the first time. The truth was circling closer like thunder you can't ignore. When they wheeled Ethan out for the transfusion, Daniel followed. Caroline stayed seated, motionless, staring at her hands. I sat beside her. "You know, don't you?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "What did you mean to happen?" "I just wanted him," she whispered. "We'd been trying for years. The treatments weren't working. I felt like my body was broken." And then, her voice dropped to a whisper, "Ryan Mercer." The name hit like ice. "He offered to help," she said. "He was working on a clinical study, an experimental fertility protocol. He said he could increase the chances of conception if I agreed to participate anonymously." "Anonymously," she nodded. "It wasn't supposed to be personal, but one night during the treatments, her voice broke. He said we needed a natural baseline sample for comparison. I was desperate. I didn't tell Daniel. I couldn't." I stared at her. "You had an affair under the guise of a medical trial." Tears streamed down her face. "I didn't know I was pregnant until weeks later. I prayed it was Daniel's. When Ethan was born..." "The red hair," I said. She nodded miserably. "I thought no one would notice." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Years of training, years of keeping calm during emergencies had taught me how to hold rage like a scalpel sharp controlled. "This isn't just your sin," I said quietly. "It's a lie that's killing your child." Hours passed. The transfusion stabilized Ethan temporarily, but the doctors wanted further testing. When the lab results came in, they confirmed that Ethan had a rare genetic anemia linked to Mercer's family line. Daniel stood in stunned silence while Caroline wept. Vivian tried to negotiate with the doctors as if reputation could rewrite DNA. I stepped closer to my son. You need to call him, I said. Who? Ryan Mercer. He shook his head. No, I don't want to hear his name. This isn't about pride, Daniel. It's about your son's life. He hesitated, then handed me his phone. You do it. I can't. Mercer answered on the third ring. His voice was smooth, confident, the kind of voice that had probably talked 100 women into trusting him. This is Margaret Donnelly, I said coldly. You know who I am. A pause. Then I suppose I do. Ethan Prescott Donnelly is your biological son. He's critically ill. The doctors need your medical history. I can't get involved. Then you'll be responsible for his death. Another pause. I could hear him breathing. Finally, he said, my family carries hereditary spherocytosis. It causes severe anemia in infants. My father died from complications. The words hit like a blow. Then you'll call the hospital and confirm it. He exhaled. I'll send them my records. And Margaret, tell Caroline I'm sorry. I hung up before he could say more. Ethan's treatment changed that night. Within hours, his color improved. The machine slowed. The doctor said he'd recover. Daniel sat beside his son's crib all night, holding his tiny hand, staring at him like he was seeing him for the first time and losing him all over again. When morning came, Caroline tried to speak. Daniel, please. He raised a hand. Don't. Everything I did was for us. No, he said quietly. Everything you did was for yourself. Vivian stepped forward. Daniel, I understand you're upset, but this is a family matter. He turned on her. You knew, didn't you? Her silence was answer enough. He looked back at Caroline. I'll take care of Ethan's medical needs. But when he's out of the hospital, I'm filing for divorce. Caroline's face crumpled. You can't mean that. I meant my vows, he said. You didn't. Later, when the doctors finally let us go in to see Ethan, I stood at the foot of his crib, watching his chest rise and fall. He was so small, so fragile, but he was fighting. Just like his father had once fought through illness as a boy. Daniel joined me. He's going to make it. Yes, I said softly, but he'll need the truth to survive too. He nodded, tears glinting. I keep thinking about what you said. The truth feels heavier than betrayal, but it's cleaner. Clean wounds heal, I said. Hidden ones fester. He smiled faintly. You should write betrayal stories, Mom. Maybe I already am. We both laughed weakly, but it broke the tension. Outside the window, the Boston skyline glowed faintly pink with dawn. I thought betrayal stories were about villains, Daniel said. But now I think they're about survivors. That's right, I whispered. And you just became one. As we left the hospital that morning, the city was waking. People walked their dogs, taxis honked, life went on. I turned to Daniel. What will you do now? He looked down at the sleeping baby in his arms. Start over, I guess. One truth at a time. And for the first time in weeks, I believed him. If this part moved you, if you believe truth matters more than appearances, tap, like so more people can find these betrayal stories that remind us how love can survive even the darkest secrets. The sound of the heart monitor still echoed in my head long after we'd left the hospital. That steady, fragile rhythm had become the only proof that Ethan was still fighting, that something in this shattered mess could still hold on. Daniel didn't speak the entire drive home. The rain had returned, streaking across the windshield in silver ribbons. Every few miles he'd glance at the rearview mirror like he was afraid the truth might be chasing us. When we reached his house, Caroline was waiting on the porch. She looked small, almost childlike, her eyes red from crying. Vivian stood behind her, immovable as stone. Daniel turned off the engine but didn't move. I can't go in there, he said. You don't have to, I told him. Not yet. He stared at the house. It's not just what she did, Mom. It's what she took from me. The moment I saw Ethan's face, I thought I saw us. Our future. Now, I don't know what I'm looking at. Then look at him, not her, I said quietly. The baby didn't lie. He nodded, but his eyes were full of something darker than grief. The stunned vacancy of a man who'd lost his faith in people. Inside, Caroline tried to speak. Daniel, please. I never meant for it to go this far. Vivian's voice sliced through the air. Enough, Caroline. He's made up his mind. The lawyers will handle this. Daniel turned to her. You think this is about lawyers? This is about my life. Our son's life. Vivian gave a tight smile. Your son, you heard the doctor. The blood doesn't match. Daniel's face went white. Get out, he said. Excuse me? You and your money, your control, get out of my house. Vivian's lips curled. This house was bought with my investment. Then take it, he snapped. I don't want it anymore. For once, Vivian didn't have a comeback. She gathered her purse, motioned to Caroline, and swept out into the rain. Caroline hesitated at the door. I'll check on Ethan in the morning, she said softly. Daniel didn't answer. When she left, he sank onto the floor, hands covering his face. What am I supposed to do now? Breathe, I said, just breathe. For 3 days he didn't sleep. He'd pace through the house at night, checking Ethan's empty crib, then wander back to the living room and sit staring at nothing. On the 4th morning, I found him at the kitchen table, a stack of legal papers spread out before him. The lawyer says I can petition for custody, he said. But since I'm not the biological father— You're the one who's been caring for him, I interrupted. That counts for something? Not in court, he said bitterly. To the law, I'm nobody. Then to hell with the law, I said. Be somebody to him anyway. He looked at me weary and broken. How, Mom? Every time I see his face, I see hers, and him, that man. Then stop seeing them, I said softly. Start seeing the child who needs you. He didn't respond, but that afternoon he drove back to the hospital to check on Ethan. When he returned, something had shifted. His eyes were calmer, his voice steadier. He smiled at me, Daniel said, just for a second, but it was real. That's all it takes, I told him. 1 second of truth to erase 1,000 lies. He managed a faint smile. You always did talk like a nurse philosopher. I'll take that as a compliment. But beneath the fragile peace, something new was brewing, something I couldn't name yet. The next morning, I went to the mailbox and found a thick envelope addressed to Mrs. Margaret Donnelly. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable Vivian's. Inside were 2 things, a single-page letter and a small USB drive. The letter read, You were right to question Caroline. But before you turn her into the only villain, remember that she was not alone. I did what I thought was necessary to protect our family name. The world forgives men who make mistakes, not women who get caught making them. The truth will come out eventually. When it does, you'll understand that all of this, the secrecy, the lies, began long before Caroline's affair. VP. The USB drive contained scanned documents, emails between Vivian and Ryan Mercer. She'd paid him, not just for fertility treatments, but for silence. My stomach turned. This wasn't just betrayal, it was orchestration. I drove straight to Daniel's. He was in the nursery, rocking Ethan, humming under his breath. I got something, I said, handing him the letter. He read it, then stared at me in disbelief. She paid him. Looks like it. She's been pulling the strings since before Ethan was conceived. Daniel sank into the chair, holding his head. So even the affair wasn't entirely her idea. It was both, I said, weakness and manipulation. One fed the other. He looked at Ethan, sleeping peacefully. You think this changes anything? It changes how you see her, I said, but not what you do next. That night, Caroline came to the house again. Her hair was wet, her face pale. Vivian's gone to New York, she said. She's furious. She says I ruined everything. Daniel's jaw tightened. You did. I know, she whispered. But I'm trying to fix it. I spoke to Mercer. He's leaving the country. He said he's sorry. Sorry doesn't erase DNA. I didn't come here to fight, she said. I came to ask if I can stay while Ethan recovers. Just until he's strong enough. Daniel hesitated. You can stay in the guest room, he said finally. For Ethan's sake, not yours. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I watched from the hallway. I wanted to believe she meant well, but Vivian's letter had changed everything. There were layers of deceit here, and I wasn't sure Caroline even understood all of them. The next few weeks were fragile. They lived in the same house but spoke little. Caroline devoted herself to Ethan's care, and Daniel began to soften, not toward her, but toward the quiet rhythm of fatherhood. Then one night while cleaning, I found another envelope hidden in a drawer in Caroline's guest room. Inside was a signed non-disclosure agreement bearing Ryan Mercer's name and a large sum wired from Prescott Holdings. Daniel, I said, showing it to him, this isn't over. He stared at the paper for a long time. She was going to buy silence again. She's learned it from the best, I said. He set the paper down, shaking his head. No more lies. Not from her. Not from anyone. That was the night Daniel called his lawyer again. 2 days later, Caroline's phone rang during dinner. She stepped into the hall to answer. I could hear only fragments. I can't talk now. Yes, I understand. No, don't call again. When she returned, her hands were shaking. Who was that? Daniel asked. No one, she said too quickly. Mercer. She didn't answer. Daniel stood. You're still talking to him. Tears welled in her eyes. He wanted to say goodbye. Daniel's face hardened. You should have let him. She reached for him, desperate. Please, Daniel, I can't lose both of you. He stepped back. You already did. Caroline collapsed into a chair, sobbing. You think I don't hate myself every time I look at Ethan? I see what I did. I see what I destroyed. Daniel's voice softened. Then start rebuilding. Not for me, for him. He walked upstairs, leaving her trembling in the dim light. I went to her side. You've been handed mercy you didn't earn, I said quietly. Don't waste it. She looked up at me, red-eyed. Do you hate me? I hate what you did, I said, but hating you won't heal my son. That night, Daniel came to me holding Ethan fast asleep in his arms. Mom, he said, his voice raw, I've decided. I'll take care of him no matter what. I don't know how long I can forgive her, but I can't punish the child for her sins. I felt something unclench in my chest. Your father would have said the same thing. Daniel smiled faintly. Then maybe I'm more like him than I thought. He looked down at Ethan. He deserves stability, truth, a family that isn't built on lies. Then give him that, I said, even if it starts with just the two of you. The following morning, Vivian called from New York. Her voice was cool-clipped. You've made quite the mess, Margaret. Daniel's talking about custody lawyers. None of this had to happen. It happened the moment you started playing God, I said. I protected my daughter. No, you protected your pride. She laughed bitterly. You think you've won, you'll see. People like us don't lose. Then maybe it's time you learned how. I hung up before she could reply. Later that day, Daniel received a delivery, a thick legal envelope. Inside was Vivian's formal statement of withdrawal from financial responsibility. Along with it, a handwritten note. If you choose truth over family, you'll lose everything. V. Daniel read it silently, then tore it in half. Then let's start over with nothing, he said. He looked at Ethan again. At least that's honest. That night, as the house finally quieted, I sat by the window and watched the moonlight spread across the nursery wall. Ethan slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Daniel slept too, his hand resting on the crib rail like a silent promise. And I thought about all the broken vows that had brought us here, the lies told in the name of love, the betrayals justified by fear, the arrogance of control disguised as protection. But beneath it all, something stronger had survived. The kind of love that doesn't come from blood or perfection, but from choosing to stay even when everything has fallen apart. The next morning felt different, not better, just quieter like the air after a storm has finished tearing everything apart. Daniel made coffee in silence, the rich smell filling the kitchen of a house that was no longer anyone's home. Ethan stirred in his bassinet near the window, the weak autumn sunlight washing over his pale cheeks. Daniel bent down, brushed his fingers against his son's tiny hand and whispered, "We'll figure it out, buddy." He didn't sound sure, but the words mattered anyway. I watched from the doorway. You know, I said softly, when your father and I started out, we didn't even have a car. We used to walk to work together, pushing you in a stroller that squeaked. Daniel smiled faintly. And you made it work. Because love isn't about resources, I said. It's about endurance. He looked out the window. Endurance I've got. I'm not sure about forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't a feeling, I said. It's a decision you keep remaking every morning. He didn't answer, but something softened in his eyes. A week later, Ethan was well enough to come home from the hospital. Daniel had sold Caroline's jewelry and a few of his own collectibles to pay the medical bills. It's just stuff, he said when I protested. We'll earn it back. Caroline came by, occasionally quiet, remorseful visits that ended with her crying in the driveway. Daniel let her hold Ethan, but he didn't let her back into his life. Not yet. That's when Vivian struck back. It started with a letter from her lawyer accusing Daniel of emotional abuse, coercion, and defamation of character. She demanded joint custody of Ethan to ensure the child's safety and proper upbringing. Daniel read it twice, then laughed without humor. She's suing me for being a better parent than her daughter. Vivian Prescott doesn't lose, I said. She just changes weapons. He folded the letter carefully, his voice calm but steady. Then it's time I stopped playing defense. Over the next few weeks, we began to rebuild. Daniel found part-time work as a contractor. I helped watch Ethan during the day, and Caroline continued therapy sessions she'd started after Vivian's departure. Then one evening, Caroline arrived unexpectedly. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "She's doing it again," she said. "My mother. She's hired someone." "Hired who?" Daniel asked. "A private investigator. He's digging into your past finances, employment, even medical records. She wants something she can use in court." Daniel sighed. "Let her dig. There's nothing to find." Caroline hesitated. "She doesn't want custody, Daniel. She wants control. If she can't have me or Ethan under her roof, she'll destroy whatever peace we find outside it." I saw the terror in her eyes. Vivian's control wasn't just legal, it was psychological, the kind that burrows into your bones. "I'll handle it," Daniel said. "I'm not afraid of her anymore." He meant it, but fear has a way of finding cracks. A few nights later, I noticed a car parked across the street. Same spot 2 nights in a row. Headlights off, engine running. The third night, I walked out with a flashlight. The car sped off, but not before I caught the license plate. Helen Strauss ran the number for me through an old contact at the DMV. The car was registered to Nicholas Kearns, a private investigator from Providence. "Vivian's man," Helen said. "I figured," I replied. "But maybe he's about to learn something she doesn't want anyone to know." The next day, while Daniel was at work, a knock came at my door. A tall man stood there, mid-40s, coat collar turned up against the wind. "Mrs. Donnelly." Yes. He flashed a badge. Nick Kearns. I'm working a private case. Mind if I ask a few questions? I do mind, I said, but I have a feeling you'll ask anyway. He smiled faintly. You're sharp. I'll be brief. Mrs. Prescott hired me to investigate your son. I know. Then you know she thinks he's hiding money, or worse, that he pressured her daughter into silence about the affair. I crossed my arms. And what do you think? He hesitated. Honestly, I think there's more to this story than I was told. I watched him carefully. You found something. He didn't deny it. Vivian wired funds to a clinic under a false name, the same clinic that handled Caroline's fertility treatments. She also made monthly payments to Ryan Mercer long after the affair ended. My pulse quickened. For what? Medical research, he said, but the trail doesn't line up. I think she was paying him for silence or something darker. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He looked uneasy. Because she told me to destroy the records. And I don't destroy evidence, especially not when a child's life is involved. He handed me a manila folder. Inside were copies of wire transfers, email logs, and one chilling document, a consent form signed by Vivian Prescott, authorizing genetic material testing for proprietary study. My stomach twisted. She was experimenting on her own grandchild. Nick nodded grimly. She wanted to ensure her bloodline was enhanced, her word not mine. Mercer's study was about genetic optimization. Ethan's condition might have been caused by that tampering. I gripped the folder tightly. You need to take this to the police. I can't, he said. My client owns half the city, but you can. He turned to leave. For what it's worth, Mrs. Donnelly, I've seen plenty of family revenge stories in my line of work. But this one, it's not about vengeance anymore. It's about who still has a soul left. Then he was gone. That night I showed Daniel the folder. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. She did this, he whispered. She risked Ethan's life to control his genetics. It's more than control, I said. It's obsession. He sank into a chair, eyes hollow. I thought the worst was behind us. It never is, I said gently. But you get to decide how it ends. What do we do? Expose her, I said simply. He looked at me surprised. You want to go public? She's been writing her story for too long, I said. It's time the world heard the truth. The next morning, Daniel took the evidence to Patricia Hendress, our family friend turned lawyer. She listened silent and pale as Daniel explained everything. This could destroy her reputation, Patricia said. Good, Daniel replied. She nearly destroyed my son. Patricia nodded. I'll prepare an affidavit and contact a federal mediator. But once this starts, it won't stop. Vivian will retaliate. I'm counting on it, Daniel said, because this time she'll be fighting the truth, not money. The story broke 2 weeks later. A local Boston news outlet ran a piece titled Prominent Donor Linked to Illegal Genetic Trials. Vivian denied everything, of course, but the paper trail spoke louder than her lawyers. Within days, her charitable foundation suspended operations. Her board resigned. Caroline showed up at my door shaking. She's threatening me, she said. She says I betrayed her. She'll ruin me. You already did that yourself? I said, not unkindly. But maybe this is your chance to rebuild without her shadow. Caroline wiped her tears. I want to testify. About Mercer, about the payments, everything. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Why? Because Ethan deserves a clean name, and so do you. He nodded slowly. Then we do it together. The hearing took place in a small courthouse downtown. Vivian didn't show, but her lawyer did, red-faced sweating, armed with a stack of documents. Patricia demolished him in 20 minutes. The judge ordered Vivian to submit all financial records for investigation and restricted her from contacting Ethan until further notice. As the gavel came down, Daniel exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath for months. Caroline reached for his hand, but he didn't take it. Instead, he turned to me. It's over, he said quietly. Not over, I corrected, just honest. He smiled faintly. That's enough. In the weeks that followed, peace began to take shape, awkward, fragile, but real. Caroline kept attending therapy. Daniel began sleeping again. Ethan thrived, his cheeks rosy, his laughter filling the house that once held only grief. Sometimes I'd sit by the window with my tea, watching Daniel play with him in the yard. The sight reminded me that even the deepest scars can make room for light if you stop picking at them. One afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was Nick Kearns again. Vivian left town, he said. Switzerland, probably. But before she left, she transferred all her holdings into a trust in Caroline's name. Daniel frowned. Why would she do that? Maybe guilt, Nick said. Or control from a distance. Either way, I thought you should know. He handed Daniel a card. If she resurfaces, call me. I've seen a lot of family revenge stories end badly. Don't let this be one of them. Then he tipped his hat and walked away. That night, after Daniel put Ethan to bed, he sat beside me at the table. Do you think forgiveness ever runs out? He asked. No, I said. But it changes shape. Sometimes it looks like letting go. Sometimes it looks like staying. And sometimes it looks like walking away. He nodded slowly. Then I think I'm finally ready to live again. I reached across the table, took his hand and squeezed. Then start tomorrow. Outside, the wind rustled through the bare branches, scattering the last of the autumn leaves. Inside, our house was quiet. But for the first time in months, it felt like peace. Not silence, not grief, but peace. And as I looked at my son and my grandson, I realized something. Every story of betrayal is also a story of survival. The difference lies in what you do after the storm. Winter settled early that year, thick and gray, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones before you realize it. By December, the Prescott scandal had all but disappeared from the headlines. Vivian's name was whispered in charity circles, half pity, half fear. But in our small corner of Boston, silence had become its own kind of salvation. Daniel was working again, long hours restoring old homes, and Ethan was growing fast, his laughter filling the house like sunlight. Caroline still came by on weekends, a quiet guest in the background, learning how to be part of her son's life without breaking the fragile balance Daniel had built. From the outside, we looked almost normal again. But grief doesn't vanish. It hides under routine, waiting for a pause in the noise. One night, after I'd put Ethan to bed, I walked into Daniel's study and found him staring at something on the desk, an old leather-bound notebook. The cover was cracked, the edges worn soft with time. "What's that?" I asked. He hesitated. "Dad's journal. I found it in the attic behind the old toolbox." My chest tightened. Patrick had always been a quiet man, a carpenter with hands that could fix anything but his own regrets. "You never read it before?" Daniel shook his head. "I thought it was just sketches, but it's more." He turned the book toward me. The first page held a familiar scrawl for my son when he's old enough to understand that truth is heavier than wood and twice as hard to carry. I sat down slowly. The entries began in 1987, the year Daniel was born. Patrick wrote about long nights at the hospital, the smell of sawdust on his clothes, the fear of being a father. But as Daniel read aloud, the words shifted. The tone darkened. "There's something I never told Margaret. The business loan, it wasn't clean money. Vivian's husband helped arrange it. Said it was an investment. I didn't ask questions. I should have. The house, the shop, all of it built on borrowed trust." I felt my stomach drop. Vivian's husband. Daniel nodded grimly. "He and Dad worked together back then. Prescott Investments. Guess some deals never really end." He turned another page. The handwriting was shakier now. "If Daniel ever learns what I did tell him, this every lie I told myself was meant to protect the people I loved. That's the trap, thinking protection and deceit are the same thing." Daniel looked up. "He was writing about you." "And about himself," I said quietly. "About all of us." For days after that, Daniel carried the journal everywhere. He said it made him feel closer to his father, like hearing advice from a ghost who finally had the courage to confess. But I knew it was more than that. The notebook had reopened something deep inside him, something he thought he'd buried with forgiveness. He started spending long evenings alone after putting Ethan to bed, rereading passages, staring out the window. One night I found him in the garage, sitting in Patrick's old work chair, the journal open beside him. "Do you ever think people are destined to repeat the same mistakes?" he asked quietly. "Only if they stop learning from them," I said. He rubbed his temples. "Dad lied for years to protect you. Caroline lied to protect herself. Vivian lied to protect her image. Maybe all of us are just one step away from becoming the people we hate." I walked closer, touched his shoulder. "You're not your father. You're the man who faced the truth when everyone else ran from it." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. 2 weeks later, Caroline called in a panic. "Daniel, please, I need your help." He was already putting on his coat before she could explain. I followed him to the car. When we arrived at her apartment, she was sitting on the floor, surrounded by unopened bills and eviction notices. "My mother froze my accounts," she said through tears. "Everything. I can't even buy formula." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I was ashamed, she whispered. "After everything, how could I ask you for more?" He knelt beside her. "Caroline, this isn't about me. It's about Ethan." For the first time in months, she looked him straight in the eye. "Do you still hate me?" He hesitated. "I don't know, but I don't want you to drown either." I watched as he picked up the bills and stacked them neatly. "You'll move back into the guest room until you get on your feet," he said. "For Ethan's sake." Caroline nodded, crying quietly. It was the right thing to do, but the moment she stepped back into that house, I saw the old wounds begin to ache again. January came, and with it a kind of uneasy peace. The house was full again, laughter, arguments, the clatter of breakfast plates, the chaos of family life trying to heal itself. But sometimes late at night, I'd hear Caroline in Ethan's room, humming lullabies that trembled on every note. One evening I found her sitting alone on the back porch wrapped in a blanket, the cold air turning her breath to fog. "Can I sit?" I asked. She nodded. "I keep waiting for him to look at me the way he used to," she said softly. "But he doesn't. I don't blame him." "Love changes," I said. "It doesn't vanish. It just stops being blind." She smiled sadly. "That's poetic." "It's experience," I said, "and scars." She looked out toward the trees. "You must think I'm a monster." "No," I said. "I think you're human. That's worse sometimes." She laughed, a small broken sound. A few days later, Daniel received a call from Nick Kearns, the investigator. "Vivian's been seen in Zurich," Nick said. "She's dying." Daniel froze. "Dying?" "Pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. She wants to see Caroline, and she asked for you too." Daniel's first instinct was to refuse. But when Caroline heard, she broke down. "She's still my mother," she said. "I can't hate her forever." So they went. I stayed home with Ethan. But when Daniel returned 3 days later, he was quieter than I'd ever seen him. "She looked like a ghost," he said, thin gray, but her voice still sharp as a blade. "What did she want?" He hesitated. "Forgiveness and confession." He took the journal from his coat pocket, Patrick's old one, and handed it to me. "She said she read parts of this years ago. Dad showed her when they were partners. She said he blamed himself for her husband's death." I frowned. "Her husband died in a car accident." "That's what we thought. But the journal says otherwise." He opened to a final entry near the back dated just a week before Patrick's heart attack. "Prescott's accident wasn't an accident. The brakes failed on a car we'd both been repairing in the shop. I warned him about the lines, told him to replace them. He said he'd get to it. Then Vivian called that morning, furious over the delay. He rushed out to prove her wrong. 10 minutes later, the car exploded on I-93. Daniel's voice faltered. "She's been living with that guilt all these years. That's why she clung to control. Why she tried to rewrite the past through Caroline, through Ethan." I stared at the page, my throat tight, so every lie since then was penance. "Penance that almost killed us," Daniel said softly. He looked out the window at the snow falling gently over the yard. "She asked if we could send her a photo of Ethan before she dies. She said she wanted to see the proof that not everything she touched turned to poison." "What did you say?" He sighed. I said I'd think about it. I studied his face, older now, lined with pain and resilience. "And what do you want?" He smiled faintly. "Peace. For her. For us. Maybe that's the same thing." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I opened Patrick's journal one last time. On the final blank page, I wrote in my own hand, "We forgive not because they deserve it, but because we cannot live forever with clenched fists." Then I closed the book and set it beside Ethan's crib. He stirred, smiling in his sleep, unaware of the ghosts that had finally been laid to rest around him. When morning came, sunlight filled the house. Daniel brewed coffee while Caroline fed Ethan in the kitchen. They spoke softly, cautiously, not like lovers, but like two people learning how to coexist after the war. As for me, I sat by the window listening to the sound of my grandson's laughter and my son's voice, the two things that had survived every storm. And I thought of Patrick and Vivian and all the broken hearts that had tried to love in the wrong ways. Some wounds never vanish. But if you listen closely beneath the pain, you can still hear the echo of what's lost and the quiet promise of what's left. By late February, the snow began to melt, leaving the yard a patchwork of gray ice and mud. It was the kind of in-between season New England knows so well, where winter hasn't finished punishing you and spring hasn't decided if it wants to arrive. Inside the house, things were thawing too, but slowly. Caroline had stayed on helping with Ethan's bedtime routine and early morning feedings. Daniel no longer flinched when she entered a room. They spoke politely sometimes, even kindly, though never for long. Every conversation ended with an unfinished sentence. One evening, after Ethan had finally fallen asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with 2 envelopes in front of him, Vivian's letter and Patrick's old journal. He turned both over in his hands like twin pieces of history, heavy and unresolved. "Are you going to open it?" I asked. "Maybe," he said, "but not alone." A week later, Caroline suggested they try family therapy, a place to talk, she said without ghosts listening from the hallway. Daniel looked doubtful. "You really think someone can fix this with a clipboard and a timer?" "I don't know," she replied. "But I can't keep pretending we're fine." It was Helen Strauss who found the retreat for them, a weekend program run by an old colleague in Vermont designed for families rebuilding after betrayal or loss. Rebuilding, the word alone felt too ambitious, but Daniel agreed. "You'll come too," he told me. I shook my head. "No, Daniel. This is your turn to speak, not mine." So they went, Daniel, Caroline, and little Ethan, while I stayed behind in the quiet house, the hum of the refrigerator the only heartbeat left. The retreat center sat on the edge of a frozen lake surrounded by pines and fog. The therapist, Dr. Mara Ellison, was a silver-haired woman with a calm that made silence feel safe. She began by asking them to describe not what happened, but what hurt. Caroline went first. "What hurts," she said, voice trembling, "is that I broke something that can't be rebuilt. I look at him every day and know he's remembering the worst version of me." Daniel stared out the window. "What hurts," he said quietly, "is that I still love her sometimes, and I hate myself for it." Dr. Ellison nodded. "Love doesn't vanish when trust dies. It lingers, waiting for instructions." For the first time, neither of them argued. Over the next 2 days, they spoke of fear, guilt, and the loneliness that follows forgiveness when you're not sure what it's worth. Daniel admitted that peace scared him because if I stop fighting, I'll have to feel everything. Caroline confessed she still woke up hearing her mother's voice telling her she'd never be enough. Dr. Ellison listened, occasionally jotting notes. "You both mistake survival for healing," she said. "Healing isn't keeping the pain quiet. It's letting it speak without letting it dictate." On the second afternoon, a courier arrived an envelope addressed to Daniel Donnelly and Caroline Prescott. The return address was Zurich. "Vivian." Caroline froze when she saw it. "I can't," she whispered. Dr. Ellison placed a hand on her arm. "Letters carry what the sender can't say aloud. Maybe it's time to listen." Daniel opened it carefully. Inside was a single page and a photograph Ethan at 6 months smiling in a blue sweater Caroline had knitted. The letter read, "I will not ask for forgiveness. It isn't mine to request. If guilt is the price of control, I've paid it. You were both right to hate me. I mistook love for ownership and I ruined everything I touched. If there's any mercy left in this family, let it belong to the child. Do not let him grow up thinking forgiveness is weakness. It is the only proof that we were ever more than our mistakes." Caroline wept silently. Daniel folded the letter back into its envelope and handed it to Dr. Ellison. "She's dying," he said. "She's trying to die lighter." Dr. Ellison looked at him. "And you?" "I'm trying to live lighter," he said. That night they stayed up late in the cabin's small common room. A fire crackled, and Ethan slept in his portable crib near the hearth. "I thought I'd hate her forever," Caroline said. "But now I just feel empty." Daniel stared at the flames. "Emptiness is better than anger. It's space. You can fill space with something new." She smiled faintly. "Like what?" He thought for a moment, maybe patience. The room was quiet except for the pop of burning wood. For the first time in a long time, they weren't fighting silence. They were sharing it. When they returned home on Sunday evening, something had changed. Not forgiveness, something smaller, gentler, more real. Caroline began taking Ethan to a local parenting group. Daniel spent weekends repairing neighbors' fences and refusing payment. They were learning how to give without debt, to speak without strategy. I noticed it most in the mornings. Daniel would pour Caroline a cup of coffee before heading to work, and she'd thank him softly. The words were simple, but the silence afterward was clean. One afternoon in March, Helen stopped by with news. "Vivian passed away," she said. "Peacefully," they said. Caroline covered her mouth, tears spilling silently. Daniel took her hand, not out of love, but solidarity. "She left a will," Helen continued. "She donated what remained of her fortune to the hospital's neonatal research fund, in Ethan's name." Daniel exhaled slowly. "So she did one decent thing." "Maybe more than one," I said. "She gave you a choice to remember her by the damage or by the repair." He nodded. "Then I'll choose the repair." That night, we sat together in the living room while snow fell outside again, the world briefly white and quiet. Caroline read Ethan a story. Daniel built a fire. I watched them and thought how fragile peace is, how it must be tended like a small flame never left alone too long. After the story, Daniel took Ethan's hand and said, "You'll never have to inherit our mistakes, only what we learned from them." Ethan giggled, clapping his hands. Caroline looked at Daniel. "He'll remember that, you know?" Daniel smiled. "Good. Maybe he'll remind me someday." Spring came early that year. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. Daniel began volunteering at the hospital's pediatric ward, helping rebuild the same wing where Ethan had once fought for his life. Caroline joined him organizing fundraisers under the same name Vivian had used for her foundation, but this time the money went to the right place. One afternoon, after a long shift, Daniel stood by the ward window watching the sunset reflect off the Charles River. "You ever think about starting over somewhere else?" he asked her. She shook her head. "No, starting over isn't about changing where you live. It's about changing who you are when you come home." He smiled. Then maybe we've already started. In May, a package arrived at the house postmarked Zurich. Inside was a small wooden box and a note in a stranger's handwriting from the estate of Vivian Prescott. Daniel opened the box. Inside lay a silver pendant, a heart divided into two halves that locked together magnetically. One side engraved CP, the other DD. Underneath another note, for what once was love and what may one day be peace. Caroline touched the pendant with trembling fingers. She must have had it made before the end. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then let's bury it, he said finally. We chose the small garden behind the house. Daniel dug the hole. Caroline placed the pendant inside. Ethan, toddling now, dropped a single daisy on top. When they covered it with soil, Daniel whispered, "Goodbye, Vivian." It wasn't a curse. It wasn't forgiveness. It was closure. That evening, Caroline sat beside Daniel on the porch steps while fireflies blinked in the grass. "Do you ever think we'll be okay?" she asked. He looked toward the horizon. "I think okay isn't a destination. It's the road we're already walking." She smiled through her tears. "That's the most hopeful thing you've ever said." "Don't get used to it," he said with a laugh. But when she leaned her head against his shoulder, he didn't pull away. Inside, I rocked Ethan to sleep, the sound of their quiet laughter drifting through the open window. For the first time, it didn't ache, it healed. Later that night, I took Patrick's journal from the shelf and opened to the last page where my note still waited. "We forgive not because they deserve it, but because we cannot live forever with clenched fists." Below it, I added one more line. And when we finally unclench them, we find they were never empty. They were holding the people we couldn't stop loving. I closed the book, feeling its weight lessen in my hands. Outside, Daniel turned off the porch light. The house went dark, but it wasn't the darkness of loss anymore. It was the kind that promises morning. By late summer, the garden behind the house was blooming again. The daisies that Ethan had dropped over Vivian's buried pendant had multiplied, wild and unplanned, like forgiveness that took root when no one was watching. Daniel often sat there in the evenings, coffee in hand, listening to the wind move through the maple trees. Sometimes Caroline joined him, sometimes not. The silence between them wasn't fragile anymore. It had become something gentle, like the pause between heartbeats. Ethan was walking now, running really through every open door and patch of grass he could find. He'd inherited Daniel's stubbornness, that was certain. But every time he fell, he looked back, searching for Daniel's face before deciding whether to cry. And every time Daniel smiled and said, "You're okay, buddy. Try again." Those small moments began to weave themselves into something neither of them had planned, a rhythm, a quiet, steady kind of fatherhood. One Saturday morning, Caroline brought home an envelope from the courthouse. She looked pale as she set it on the table. "It's from Zurich," she said. "Vivian's estate is officially closed. They're asking if we'll accept the final transfer." Daniel hesitated. "Money." "Partly, but there's more. A legal notice." He opened it. Inside was a short document request for confirmation of parental guardianship transfer. The line that made him pause was written in Vivian's looping script. "In the event of my death, I wish for Daniel Donnelly to be recognized as Ethan Prescott's legal father, should he choose to accept." Caroline covered her mouth. She planned this. Daniel stared at the page. She knew I'd hesitate. "Will you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked through the kitchen window at Ethan, who was in the yard chasing butterflies with the same clumsy joy that once defined Daniel's own childhood. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He walked the hallways, passing family photos, Caroline holding baby Ethan, a blurry snapshot of the three of them at the lake, one of me holding the boy at Christmas. Each frame told a story that was part truth, part wishful thinking. In the living room, he stopped before Patrick's old armchair, the same one where he'd first learned to read, the same one where I used to rock him when storms scared him. The lamp beside it flickered softly, as if waiting for an answer. "Dad," he whispered into the quiet, "what would you have done?" I didn't answer out loud, of course. But if I could have, I would have told him, "You already are his father. You just haven't signed it yet." 2 days later, Daniel drove to the courthouse alone. He didn't tell Caroline. He didn't tell me. He just went parking by the old oak tree outside the registry building, hands trembling as he filled out the form. "Are you certain you want to proceed?" the clerk asked gently. "This makes it permanent." Daniel nodded. "I'm certain." When he handed the papers back, something inside him loosened a knot that had been there since the day Ethan was born. He drove home in silence, the document folded neatly beside him, and for the first time in years the road ahead felt clear. That evening he gathered us in the living room. Caroline sat beside Ethan on the rug, helping him stack blocks into a crooked tower. I joined them, knowing instinctively that something important was coming. Daniel stood by the window, holding a folder. "I went to the courthouse today," he said. I signed the papers. Caroline froze. Daniel, it's done, he continued softly. I'm legally his father now. Tears welled in her eyes. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said. That's why it matters. Ethan looked up, sensing the shift in the room. He toddled over and climbed into Daniel's lap, babbling in half words. Daniel wrapped his arms around the boy, pressing his forehead to Ethan's hair. I made him a promise, he said quietly, that he'll never grow up wondering who chose him. The weeks that followed were lighter, almost peaceful. Daniel framed the adoption papers and hung them in his office, not out of pride, but gratitude. He told friends at the hospital only when they asked, and even then he spoke of it with humility. Biology's just ink on a page, he said once. Love's the signature that makes it real. Still, something lingered in the corners of his days, a restlessness he couldn't name. It wasn't doubt. It was something closer to grief. One afternoon, while sorting through boxes in the attic, Daniel found a small tape recorder, one of the old ones Vivian used for dictations. There was a single cassette inside, labeled simply, "For Daniel." He hesitated, then pressed play. Vivian's voice filled the room, weaker but clear. If you're listening to this, I'm gone. I've been many things, controlling, proud, blind, but never brave enough to admit I was wrong. You showed me what love looks like when it stops expecting payment. You loved the child my mistakes created. That makes you more my family than blood ever did. Take care of him, Daniel, and take care of yourself. Love him not for me, but for you. Daniel sat there long after the tape clicked to silence. For once, he didn't cry. He just breathed deeply and evenly, as if releasing the last piece of anger that had followed him for years. Autumn arrived again. The leaves turned the color of fire, and the air smelled of wood smoke and promise. Caroline had found new work at the hospital foundation. Daniel continued volunteering on weekends. Their lives weren't perfect. There were still arguments, quiet disagreements, moments when the past brushed too close, but they'd learned to pause to breathe before breaking. Ethan grew fast curious, joyful, endlessly stubborn. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the first stars appear, he pointed at the sky and asked, "Daddy, is Grandma in the clouds?" Daniel smiled. "Maybe, but I think she's also in those flowers you planted." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Then she's pretty." "She is," Daniel said softly. Caroline glanced over her eyes, meeting his in quiet acknowledgement, the kind that says we've survived this storm together. When Ethan's adoption certificate arrived in the mail, I placed it inside Patrick's old Bible, between the pages about grace and redemption. It felt right there, a bridge between past and future. That night, as we sat down for dinner, Daniel raised his glass, not wine, but simple iced tea. "To family," he said. Caroline smiled. "To the family we make." Ethan giggled, lifting his plastic cup. "To Daddy." We laughed, the sound filling the room that once echoed with silence. And for the first time, I realized the story that began with betrayal had become something else entirely, a story of reclamation, of courage, of love that refused to give up. Maybe that's what life is, at its truest, a series of family revenge stories, not against people, but against pain itself. The act of building light where darkness once lived. Before bed, Daniel tucked Ethan in and whispered, "Sleep well, my son." The words felt simple, ordinary, and yet they carried the weight of everything he'd fought for, the nights of anger, the years of loss, the quiet miracle of choice. Outside, the wind shifted, scattering the last of the summer petals. In the distance, church bells rang softly as if blessing what had finally been restored. The years passed quietly after that autumn. The maple trees behind the Donnelly house grew taller, and so did Ethan. The boy who once stumbled through the grass now rode his bike along the narrow streets of Cambridge, his laughter echoing between the old brick houses. Daniel liked to say that each season left a mark on the heart, and this one, this calm after so much chaos, felt like a reward earned rather than given. The garden, once a symbol of sorrow, now bloomed with color every spring. Daisies still grew where Vivian's pendant was buried, and Caroline had added roses nearby. She said they reminded her that even thorns can belong to something beautiful. They weren't a perfect family, not by any measure. There were still disagreements, school decisions, work schedules, forgotten anniversaries, but they had learned to speak before anger hardened into silence. And somehow, through all of it, Ethan became the proof that love, when chosen again and again, could rewrite any story. On Ethan's 7th birthday, Daniel found him sitting under the oak tree holding Patrick's old Bible. Inside, tucked between the pages, was the adoption certificate. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice soft, "did I come from you?" Daniel smiled. "You came to me. That's even better." Ethan thought for a moment, frowning slightly. "But Mom says we're all made from love." "She's right," Daniel replied. "You were made from love, Ethan. It just took us a little longer to find each other." The boy nodded solemnly as if he understood something beyond his years. Then he whispered, "That's okay. I like that kind of love." Daniel felt something shift inside him, something final and freeing. In that moment, he realized he no longer thought of Ethan as the child he adopted. He was simply his son. That summer, Caroline proposed something unexpected, a trip to the lake house, the same place they'd once tried to sell during their darkest days. "It's time," she said. "Ethan should see where we started." Daniel hesitated at first, remembering the last time they'd stood there, the cold air, the silence, the shadows of betrayal. But Caroline was right. Healing meant walking through memory without letting it break you again. When they arrived, the house looked smaller than they remembered. The dock creaked, the paint had faded, but the lake was the same calm, endless, forgiving. Ethan ran straight to the water, his red hair glowing in the sun. "Come on," he shouted. "It's perfect." Daniel and Caroline followed, laughing as he splashed them both. For a brief moment, it felt like time folded in on itself, the past and present, blending not in pain, but in peace. That night, they built a fire by the shore. Ethan roasted marshmallows while Daniel and Caroline watched the flames dance against the twilight. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "What?" "Everything. Staying. Trying again." Daniel stared into the fire for a long time. "No," he said finally. "Regret is for things you wish you hadn't done. But even the worst of what we lived through brought us here. To him. To this." She smiled faintly. "You always find the light in the ashes." He took her hand, surprising them both. "Because I learned that ashes mean something burned, but not everything was destroyed." They sat in silence, the fire crackling, the water whispering against the shore. For once, the silence wasn't about loss. It was about gratitude. When autumn came again, Ethan started his first day of school. Daniel walked him to the gate, just as his own father had once done. "Be kind," he told him. "Be curious. And remember, what makes you strong isn't how much you win, it's how much you keep your heart open." Ethan nodded solemnly, then turned and ran toward the building without looking back. Watching him go, Daniel felt tears rise, tears not of sorrow but of fulfillment. Caroline joined him, slipping her hand into his. "He's ready," she said. "So are we," Daniel replied. In December, the hospital where Daniel volunteered named a new pediatric scholarship after Ethan. "For children who remind us that families are chosen by love, not blood," the inscription read. At the ceremony, Caroline gave a short speech. Her voice trembled, but her message was clear. "We spent years thinking forgiveness was a weakness," she said. "But forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about freeing the heart from carrying the past. Our story began with mistakes, but it ends with gratitude. Because love, when chosen, becomes the truest kind." The audience, doctors, nurses, parents, sat in quiet reflection. Many of them had lived their own family revenge stories, not of anger, but of redemption. Later that night, as the snow began to fall outside their window, Daniel wrote in his journal, "We don't get to choose how love begins, but we can always choose how it continues. Love isn't a promise that everything will stay the same. It's the courage to keep showing up even when it doesn't." He closed the notebook, exhaling softly. In the next room, Ethan slept soundly, clutching the same elephant blanket from his baby days. The house, once filled with grief, now hummed with quiet life, like a song that finally found its melody. Caroline appeared at the doorway, her hair silvering at the edges. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I never believed peace could be this quiet," Daniel said. She smiled. "It's not quiet, you're just used to the noise of pain." He laughed softly, standing to join her by the window. Outside, the garden lay still beneath the snow, waiting for spring to come again. Years later, when Ethan was old enough to ask about his past, Daniel and Caroline told him the truth. Not the version filled with anger or guilt, but the one filled with meaning. "Your story began with mistakes," Daniel said, "but it was saved by love that refused to give up." Ethan smiled, thoughtful. "So love can fix anything." Daniel shook his head gently. "Not everything, son, but it can help you live with what can't be fixed, and sometimes that's enough. And maybe that's the lesson this story leaves behind. That love is not about perfection, it's about persistence. That forgiveness doesn't erase pain, it transforms it into wisdom. And that the families we build from courage and compassion often outlast the ones built from expectation, because in the end, every act of mercy is a quiet victory, every chosen kindness a form of redemption. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If it touched something in your heart, if it reminded you that it's never too late to heal or to love again, please take a moment to give this video a like. Subscribe so you won't miss our next stories about forgiveness, love, and the families we choose. And in the comments, tell me, Have you ever forgiven someone who didn't deserve it just to find peace for yourself? I'll be reading your words, and maybe, just maybe, your story will be the next one we tell. Because here, every story, no matter how broken, has the chance to find its light again.